On the 23rd of June 2023, the world was shocked by the words and soon after, the actions of Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group against the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and then Putin himself. For almost a whole year, tensions had been building between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense, led by Chief of the General Staff Vasily Gerasimov and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. This tension stemmed from the gross mishandling of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and this tension finally culminated in the biggest threat to Vladimir Putin's regime since its inception, the Wagner Rebellion. But how did this unfold? And how did the Wagner Group go from fighting in the ruins of Bakhmut for months to almost seizing Moscow in 2 days? What was expected to take 3 days turned into the worst conflict Russia had gotten into since the Second World War. In the 10 months leading up to June 23rd, the PMC Wagner Group spearheaded Russian advances in the Ukrainian Donbas region. They took Soledar and eventually Bakhmut after horrendous losses, while the regular Russian army failed so badly in their winter offensive around Avdiivka that people didn't even know an offensive had happened. When Wagner took Soledar, the Russian Ministry of Defense congratulated them on their success. In response, Prigozhin seemed to imply that he didn't need the Russian army's help to gain victories on the battlefield. Upon hearing this, let's just say the Ministry of Defense got a bit pissed. They seemingly said to the Wagner Group, "Oh, you don't want our help? Okay." They then stopped supplying ammunition to Wagner units. Now, since he probably didn't expect his ammo to get cut off, Prigozhin was not happy. At all. He blasted Shoigu and Gerasimov for cutting his ammo supply off, and blamed them for the massive losses they were taking. He kicked up enough of a fuss to get the MOD to resume his supply of ammo. Over the next few months after taking Soledar, tensions gradually built up over time as this cycle continued. Wagner would advance on the front lines, Prigozhin would brag about how his troops were better than the regular Russian army, Shoigu takes his ammo, Prigozhin gets mad, he gets his ammo back, and repeat. As this cycle repeated, Prigozhin's attacks against the MOD would keep escalating, even to the point where he seemed to criticize Vladimir Putin himself. This infighting was doing nothing good for the Russians on the front lines. While the Ukrainians were taking significant losses defending Bakhmut, this back and forth between Prigozhin and the MOD would help ensure that the Russians were getting it worse. Even though Bakhmut wasn't the most strategically important city to defend on the front, tying down Russian and Wagner forces in the city elevated the symbolic importance of the city because it was one of the only places that Russia was advancing in on the front line. Upon taking Bakhmut, Prigozhin announced that Wagner troops would pull out of the city and Russian army troops would take their place. It seemed that Shoigu wasn't happy with this move, since he apparently ordered army troops to mine the roads that led out of Bakhmut, so Wagner soldiers would be killed as they left the city. Wagner was told about this, so they demined the roads as they left. With this plan foiled, it looked like Shoigu triggered his plan B.
Sorry to disappoint you, Yugi. Huh? You triggered my trap card! Power balance!
A drunk Russian commander and his unit allegedly attacked a Wagner convoy that was leaving Bakhmut for no reason. Naturally, the Wagner Group humiliated this guy for the world to see. When two Russian groups that were against Putin invaded Russia's Belgorod Oblast twice, the Russian military failed to offer serious resistance and they kept getting pushed back by the invaders, further humiliating the MOD. After this, Prigozhin called for Shoigu and Gerasimov to be executed by firing squad for their inability to protect the country and their failure in commanding the military in Ukraine. After this, Shoigu ordered that all soldiers employed by private military companies fighting with the Russian army in Ukraine had to sign contracts to join the Russian army by July 1st. This was a clear attempt by the MOD to absorb the Wagner Group into the Russian army and remove Prigozhin's power. It looks like this put a clock on Prigozhin's potential as a threat to the Russian military. If he wanted to get rid of Shoigu and Gerasimov, he would have to do it before it was too late. An interview was published with Prigozhin where he said that the reason Ukraine was invaded was so Shoigu could go down in history as a marshal, as well as a two-time recipient of the Hero of the Russian Federation award. And also, occupying Ukraine would allow Russia's elite to establish a Ukrainian puppet government led by Viktor Medvedchuk, one of Putin's closest friends. And this government would allow them to plunder Ukrainian businesses. He also stated that due to rampant corruption in the armed forces, Russia's best units were almost annihilated in the first 3 days of the war. This didn't seem out of form for Prigozhin to claim, but it was probably out of form for him to claim that Russian forces were ordered by Shoigu to attack a Wagner camp behind the front lines with rockets, artillery and assault helicopters. Whether this was true or not didn't seem to matter to Prigozhin, since this incident would serve as the pretext for the initiation of his rebellion. On the morning of the 23rd, Wagner forces left their positions in the Donbas region of Ukraine and advanced on the city of Rostov-on-Don, where the commanders leading the Russian war effort were located. TV channels were hacked across Russia to broadcast a message from Prigozhin saying that his forces were marching on Moscow to destroy the Ministry of Defense. Once in Rostov, Wagner forces surrounded the headquarters of Russia's southern military district, seeking to capture Shoigu, who had reportedly been in the area. However, he had fled. What they did capture, though, were the commanders located in the headquarters, as well as documents that confirmed Russian forces were taking 3 to 4 times the losses reported by the state media. The Wagner Group allowed the headquarters and other military sites in Rostov to continue to operate, as so not to hamper their efforts in Ukraine. The Wagner convoy would move on from Rostov and head to Voronezh and then Moscow. By this point, many high-ranking Russian generals, commanders and commentators had pleaded with Prigozhin to stop his march on Moscow. Most notably, one of Prigozhin's friends, and the former commander of the war in Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin. I'll add to this later. Despite this, Wagner columns continued to advance towards Moscow. Vladimir Putin eventually gave a speech to the nation about the ongoing situation, where he stated that Wagner's rebellion was like a stab in the back that had threatened to break the nation, like it did in 1917. He said that all special detachments had been ordered to suppress the rebellion, and he gave Wagner soldiers one last chance to surrender. Russian fighter jets and helicopters began to bomb Wagner columns on the highway near Voronezh. Wagner air defenses caused many losses to Russia's air forces, with at least 1 Ka-52 assault helicopter, 1 multi-purpose and 3 electronic helicopters, a transport helicopter, and even an aerial command aircraft, all visually confirmed to have been lost. In Voronezh, an oil depot was destroyed by a helicopter missile as fighting raged between the air force and the convoy. Things were getting desperate for the Ministry of Defense and the government as the day progressed. Preparations were made for a potential defense of the capital as barricades were set up and roads were blocked off. By this point, Putin, among several other high-ranking Russian officials, have reportedly fled Moscow, heading near St. Petersburg. Chechen soldiers were seemingly preparing to engage Wagner forces occupying the city. Everything was about to come to a climax. But suddenly, the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, stepped in to negotiate on behalf of the Russian government with the Wagner Group to get the convoy to stop their march. Lukashenko has known both Putin and Prigozhin on a personal level for around 20 years, making him a good fit as a negotiator in this situation. And sure enough, Wagner troops were ordered to stop the march and withdraw. Prigozhin would leave Russia and go into exile in Belarus. The Russian government would drop all charges against him, while Wagner troops were given the option to either join the Russian army in Ukraine, return to their families, or join Prigozhin in Belarus. Since this is such a recent event, its after effects and consequences are still unclear. As of the making of this video, it is known that the remainder of the Wagner Group are in the process of setting up camps in central Belarus. Belarusian state media has broadcasted footage of soldiers of their army being trained by Wagner troops. So make of that what you will. Remember when I mentioned this guy? Well, it appears that due to his connections with Prigozhin from before the rebellion, he's been purged from Russia's military command due to suspicions that he knew about the rebellion before it happened and didn't warn anyone. Russian government officials have said that Surovikin is, quote, resting. Whether that means he's resting as in he's taking a break, or he's resting in a grave is unclear. One thing that is clear, though, is that Putin's self-curated strongman image has been severely damaged, to say the least. No Russian leader has looked this weak since almost 30 years ago to this day. If this amount of incompetence, division and dysfunctionality continues into the future for Russia, then a Ukrainian victory in this war will be assured, no matter how long it takes.